The silver ribbon around the anniversary gift was still tied when Rowan Hale walked into the sunlit dining room and realized 23 years of marriage had ended without a single word being spoken. The bouquet of white lilies slipped from her hands and scattered across the polished wooden floor as she watched her husband, Garrett Hale, standing far closer to her younger sister than any husband ever should. Their fingers were intertwined. Their foreheads rested together. They weren't startled because they had been caught. They were startled because they believed Rowan wasn't supposed to come home until hours later. The anniversary lunch she had planned had become the day she buried the life she thought she had. The greatest betrayal wasn't discovering her husband loved someone else. It was realizing the woman he had chosen was the little sister she had protected since childhood. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than revenge, if you believe broken hearts can still find hope, and if stories of courage inspire you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps our community continue sharing emotional journeys that remind us no storm lasts forever. Rowan didn't scream. She didn't throw the gift. She didn't collapse. The silence inside her was somehow louder than any outburst could have been. Garrett stepped back awkwardly while her sister, Tessa Whitmore, folded her arms as though she had done nothing wrong. The sunlight pouring through the large windows illuminated every expression with cruel clarity. Rowan noticed the untouched anniversary cake resting on the kitchen island beside the expensive champagne Garrett had apparently planned to enjoy with someone else. Every thoughtful detail she had prepared for weeks suddenly looked like decorations for a funeral. For 23 years Rowan had been the dependable one. She built routines, remembered birthdays, cared for aging parents, balanced the family finances, and quietly supported Garrett while he built his successful architectural firm from a tiny office into one of the city's most respected companies. She never demanded expensive gifts or lavish vacations. She believed loyalty was measured by ordinary days rather than grand gestures. Garrett often told friends he would never have succeeded without her steady encouragement. Hearing those compliments had once filled her with pride. Now they echoed inside her as cruel jokes. Tessa had always lived differently. 6 years younger than Rowan, she chased excitement wherever she could find it. Jobs changed every few months. Relationships rarely lasted longer than a season. She possessed effortless charm that made people forgive her mistakes before she even apologized. Rowan had spent most of her adult life rescuing Tessa from unpaid rent, failed business ideas, broken engagements, and impulsive decisions. Every rescue came from love rather than obligation. She never imagined each sacrifice quietly taught her sister that someone else would always clean up the damage. Their parents had passed away several years earlier, leaving Rowan feeling responsible for keeping the family together. Holiday dinners, birthdays, summer barbecues, every gathering happened because Rowan organized them. Garrett often praised her generosity, encouraging her to invite Tessa more often since she seemed lonely. Looking back, Rowan realized those suggestions had become increasingly frequent during the previous year. Tiny memories suddenly rearranged themselves into an unbearable truth. Garrett volunteering to drive Tessa home after family lunches. The secret smiles she once dismissed as harmless. Business trips that lasted one day longer than necessary. Phone calls Garrett always answered outside. Tessa suddenly wearing designer handbags despite constantly complaining about money. Rowan had ignored every warning because trust had become part of her identity. She quietly placed the anniversary gift on the table without opening it. Garrett finally tried to explain, but Rowan lifted one trembling hand, stopping whatever carefully rehearsed excuse he intended to offer. She wasn't interested in lies polished into explanations. She picked up her purse, walked to the front door, and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight without looking back. The warm breeze touched her face while tears blurred the neighborhood she had called home for 2 decades. Instead of driving aimlessly, Rowan parked beside a peaceful riverside park where families laughed beneath enormous oak trees. Children chased pigeons while elderly couples walked hand in hand along the water. Life continued around her as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She sat alone on a wooden bench and finally allowed herself to cry. Not loud, desperate sobs, but quiet tears carrying years of trust away one drop at a time. Hours later she found herself remembering something her grandmother once told her after a painful disappointment. The strongest people never rushed revenge because pain makes terrible decisions. Instead, they rebuilt themselves until the people who hurt them became insignificant. Rowan repeated those words over and over until the shaking in her hands slowly faded. By late afternoon Garrett had called more than 40 times. Tessa had sent endless messages insisting everything was complicated and begging Rowan to listen. She ignored every notification. Silence suddenly felt more powerful than arguments. The following morning the sun rose over clear blue skies as Rowan drove to the office she had quietly managed beside Garrett for nearly 20 years. Most employees viewed Garrett as the visionary behind the company, but Rowan understood every financial record, every investor relationship, every contract, every insurance policy, and every debt. She had never sought recognition because she believed they were building a future together. That future no longer existed. She spent the entire day reviewing files with calm precision. Nothing illegal. Nothing dishonest. Simply facts she had overlooked while trusting the wrong people. Garrett's success rested upon foundations she had carefully maintained. Without her management, many of those foundations would begin to crack. She wasn't planning to destroy the business. Hundreds of employees depended upon it. But she would no longer allow Garrett to benefit from years of invisible sacrifices while pretending she contributed nothing. Over the next several days Rowan rented a bright apartment overlooking a botanical garden. Every morning sunlight poured through large windows filled with flowering plants instead of painful memories. She bought inexpensive furniture, fresh paint, and books she had always wanted to read. The apartment wasn't luxurious, but every corner belonged entirely to her. Friends slowly learned the truth. Garrett attempted to control the story, describing the affair as an unfortunate mistake caused by emotional distance. Unfortunately for him, the facts refused to cooperate. People remembered Rowan organizing every charity fundraiser, supporting every company celebration, standing proudly beside Garrett through difficult years. They also remembered Tessa attending more company events than seemed appropriate. Garrett's reputation didn't collapse because Rowan attacked him. It weakened because people recognized consistency. Rowan remained respectful while Garrett grew increasingly defensive. Every explanation sounded slightly different from the last. Every excuse raised new questions. Meanwhile Tessa expected Garrett to leave his marriage immediately. Instead, she discovered life with a man who had betrayed his wife wasn't nearly as romantic outside secrecy. Garrett worried constantly about legal matters, financial settlements, public embarrassment, and declining business opportunities. The excitement that had fueled their affair slowly disappeared beneath ordinary consequences. One warm afternoon Rowan met with an experienced attorney named Celeste Vaughn, a woman known for combining compassion with remarkable intelligence. Rather than encouraging endless courtroom battles, Celeste carefully explained every option available. Rowan listened quietly, asking thoughtful questions instead of emotional ones. Years of managing complex finances had prepared her surprisingly well for difficult negotiations. As documents spread across the conference table, one unexpected discovery changed everything. Several years earlier Garrett himself had insisted many major assets remain jointly protected because he trusted Rowan completely. Ironically, the legal protections he once considered symbols of love would now ensure fairness during the divorce. For the first time since the anniversary, Rowan smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something far more important. Hope had quietly returned. Garrett believed the silence meant Rowan was breaking. He convinced himself that sooner or later she would call, cry, and beg to save the marriage. After more than 2 decades together, he thought he understood exactly how much she needed him. What he failed to understand was that the woman he had betrayed was no longer trying to save a marriage. She was trying to save herself. Over the following weeks, every sunrise felt a little different. Rowan refused to spend her mornings replaying painful memories. She began each day with long walks through the botanical gardens near her apartment, watching gardeners carefully prune roses that had survived harsh winters. There was something comforting about seeing beauty return after being cut back. She realized healing wasn't about pretending nothing had happened. It was about growing again despite what had happened. Garrett's life, however, was becoming increasingly complicated. Clients who had admired his integrity quietly postponed contracts. Investors who had once trusted his judgment began asking more detailed questions about company leadership. Rumors spread quickly, not because Rowan shared her private pain, but because people noticed she had disappeared from the office while Garrett suddenly looked exhausted, distracted, and unable to make decisions without the woman who had always stood behind him. Many employees slowly discovered something they had never truly appreciated. Rowan had been the steady heartbeat of the company. She remembered birthdays, solved payroll problems before anyone noticed them, comforted anxious employees during difficult seasons, and built relationships that Garrett often took credit for. Her absence left an emptiness that expensive consultants couldn't replace. Tessa expected Garrett to spend every afternoon celebrating their new future together. Instead, she found herself listening to endless complaints about attorneys, financial reports, damaged business relationships, and public embarrassment. The excitement of stolen moments had disappeared. Every conversation seemed to revolve around problems neither of them knew how to solve. She slowly realized Garrett had fallen in love with the excitement of betrayal rather than the responsibility of building an honest relationship. One bright afternoon, Rowan received an unexpected invitation from Eleanor Briggs, the chairwoman of a local charitable foundation Rowan had volunteered with for years. Eleanor explained that several board members had heard about Rowan leaving Garrett's company and wondered whether she would consider helping oversee financial operations for their rapidly expanding organization. Rowan almost declined. Her confidence had been shattered. She questioned every decision she had made during the last 20 years. Eleanor gently reminded her that betrayal doesn't erase ability. Someone else's dishonesty should never become the measure of another person's worth. Those words stayed with Rowan long after the meeting ended. She accepted the position. Within weeks she discovered how deeply she had missed using her skills for something that reflected her own values instead of someone else's ambitions. The organization helped struggling families find housing, funded scholarships for students, and supported elderly people living alone. Every successful project reminded Rowan that kindness could still exist even after unimaginable betrayal. Meanwhile, Garrett's financial situation continued deteriorating. Several major clients specifically requested meetings with Rowan after learning she had left. They trusted her judgment more than his promises. Since she no longer represented the company, those relationships quietly faded away. Garrett watched years of reputation slowly slip through his fingers, understanding too late that respect cannot be inherited from another person's character. Tessa grew increasingly frustrated. She had imagined luxury vacations, glamorous parties, and a carefree future. Instead, she found herself sitting across from a man constantly checking legal emails and calculating divorce settlements. Every morning seemed to bring another problem. Every afternoon brought another reminder that actions always carry consequences. One sunny Saturday, Rowan attended a community fundraiser organized by the charitable foundation. Children painted colorful murals while local musicians performed cheerful songs in the park. Volunteers laughed together beneath rows of white tents decorated with fresh flowers. Rowan hadn't smiled so freely in months. As she helped distribute meals, an elderly woman named Margaret recognized her from years earlier. Margaret gently squeezed Rowan's hand and thanked her for helping pay for life-saving medication after her husband had become seriously ill. Rowan barely remembered the donation. She had quietly arranged it through Garrett's company years before without expecting anyone to know. Margaret looked into Rowan's eyes with overwhelming gratitude and told her something she would never forget. The people who quietly choose kindness rarely understand how deeply they change other lives. Rowan drove home that afternoon realizing something extraordinary. Garrett had stolen her trust. Tessa had stolen her family. But neither of them had stolen her heart. That belonged entirely to her. Several days later, Celeste called with important news. Garrett's attorneys finally wanted to negotiate. After reviewing financial records, they realized Rowan's contributions to both the marriage and the business were impossible to dismiss. Garrett faced the possibility of a lengthy legal battle he was unlikely to win. The meeting took place inside a bright conference room overlooking the city skyline. Sunlight reflected from nearby glass buildings, filling the room with almost blinding light. Garrett looked older than Rowan remembered. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His expensive suit could not hide months of stress. For the first time since the anniversary, they sat across from one another. Garrett attempted another apology. This time there were tears. He admitted he had confused attention with love and excitement with happiness. He insisted losing Rowan had made him realize she had always been the best part of his life. Rowan listened without interrupting. She believed every word. Not because she thought he deserved another chance. Because regret had finally forced him to become honest. She calmly explained that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. She no longer carried hatred in her heart, but she could never rebuild a marriage whose foundation had been deliberately destroyed. Trust wasn't broken in one afternoon. It had been broken through hundreds of secret choices. Garrett lowered his head. For the first time, he understood there would be no dramatic reunion. Some endings are permanent. The divorce settlement concluded fairly. Rowan received her rightful share of the business she had spent decades helping build. She quietly sold her remaining ownership rather than staying connected to painful memories. Instead of buying luxury cars or expensive vacations, she invested much of the money into expanding the charitable foundation and creating scholarships for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, divorce, or financial hardship. News of Rowan's work spread throughout the community. People stopped introducing her as Garrett's former wife. They simply introduced her as Rowan Hale. A woman whose strength inspired others. As for Tessa, reality finally arrived without warning. Garrett's emotional distance became impossible to ignore. Their relationship, born from secrecy and betrayal, slowly collapsed beneath mistrust. If someone could betray one person so easily, how could anyone truly believe they would never betray again? One warm afternoon, Tessa appeared outside Rowan's office carrying nothing but a small envelope and a face filled with regret. Rowan looked through the window and quietly wondered whether some wounds could ever fully heal. One warm afternoon, Tessa appeared outside Rowan's office carrying nothing but a small envelope and a face filled with regret. Rowan looked through the window and quietly wondered whether some wounds could ever fully heal. Months earlier, seeing her younger sister would have filled her heart with warmth. Now it stirred memories she had worked tirelessly to place behind her. Still, she had promised herself that bitterness would never become her permanent companion. She asked the receptionist to invite Tessa inside. The sunlight streaming through the office windows made it impossible for either of them to hide behind shadows. Tessa looked nothing like the confident woman Rowan had discovered on her anniversary. The expensive clothes had disappeared. The confident smile was gone. Her eyes were swollen from countless sleepless mornings, and the envelope in her trembling hand seemed far heavier than a few sheets of paper should have been. She placed the envelope on Rowan's desk before quietly sitting down. Inside were old family photographs that Rowan had thought were lost forever. Pictures of birthday parties, camping trips, school graduations, and holidays with their parents. Tucked between them was a handwritten letter. Tessa admitted she had spent weeks trying to write something worthy of forgiveness but eventually realized there were no perfect words. She confessed that she had spent most of her life comparing herself to Rowan. Everywhere they went, people admired Rowan's kindness, patience, intelligence, and quiet strength. Instead of allowing that admiration to inspire her, jealousy slowly poisoned her heart. Garrett's attention had made her feel important for the first time in years. She convinced herself she deserved happiness, even if it came at the expense of the one person who had sacrificed the most for her. By the time she realized what she had destroyed, it was too late. Garrett had ended their relationship only weeks after the divorce became final. Without secrecy, there was no excitement left. Every conversation reminded him of the family they had broken. Every disagreement led back to the same painful truth. The relationship built on betrayal had collapsed beneath the weight of mistrust. Tessa discovered that winning someone through dishonesty often means living with the fear of losing them the same way. Rowan quietly folded the letter. She felt sadness. She felt disappointment. But to her surprise, she no longer felt anger. Time had done what revenge never could. It had softened the sharp edges of pain without erasing the lessons it carried. She realized something important. Forgiveness is not pretending the past never happened. Forgiveness is choosing not to let the past control your future. She told Tessa she could not rebuild the relationship they once shared. Some trust, once broken, cannot return to what it was. But she also refused to spend the rest of her life carrying hatred. She wished Tessa healing, wisdom, and the courage to become a better person than the one who had made those devastating choices. Tears rolled down Tessa's face as she quietly left the office. Neither sister embraced. Neither pretended everything was suddenly normal. But both walked away lighter than when they had arrived. A few months later, Rowan stood beneath a bright summer sky at the opening ceremony of the Hail Hope Foundation, a nonprofit created to help people rebuild their lives after betrayal, financial hardship, and unexpected loss. The name wasn't chosen to honor her former marriage. It honored the hope she had discovered after everything else had fallen apart. Families gathered on the freshly cut lawn as children laughed, volunteers served meals, and scholarship recipients proudly shared their dreams for the future. Rowan looked around at hundreds of smiling faces and realized her greatest achievement had never been helping build Garrett's company. It was helping build lives. News reporters covering the event asked Rowan how she had managed to overcome such a public betrayal. She smiled gently. She explained that revenge had once seemed like the only path forward. She imagined exposing every lie, humiliating those who had humiliated her, and making them feel every ounce of pain she had endured. But over time she discovered a far greater victory. The best revenge wasn't destroying the people who broke her. It was becoming someone their betrayal could no longer destroy. Those words spread quickly through newspapers, television interviews, and social media. Thousands of people wrote to Rowan sharing their own stories of heartbreak, divorce, family betrayal, and recovery. Many said her journey gave them the courage to leave unhealthy relationships or forgive themselves for trusting the wrong people. One bright afternoon nearly 2 years after that unforgettable anniversary, Rowan returned to the same riverside park where she had once sat alone with tears filling her eyes. The same oak trees stretched across the peaceful landscape. Families still laughed. Children still chased birds across the grass. Life had continued exactly as it always does. She sat on the familiar wooden bench and smiled. The woman who had cried there years earlier would hardly recognize the person she had become. She no longer measured her worth by someone else's loyalty. She no longer feared starting over. She had learned that endings are often hidden beginnings. The anniversary that once represented the worst day of her life had become the day she remembered finding herself again. If this story touched your heart, before we reach the end, tell us in the comments. Do you believe forgiveness makes a person stronger, or do some betrayals never deserve a second chance? Your thoughts may encourage someone who is quietly facing a similar struggle today. As Rowan watched the afternoon sun sparkle across the river, she understood that happiness had returned, not because the past had changed, but because she had. The wounds had become wisdom. The tears had become strength. The broken promises had become the foundation for a life filled with purpose, compassion, and genuine peace. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember, no matter how painful betrayal may be, it never has the final word. As long as you choose courage over bitterness and hope over despair, every sunrise brings another opportunity to begin again. Sometimes the people who break your heart unknowingly set you on the path toward the life you were always meant to live.